And staying with labor matters, where we understand that a recent research shows Nigerian minimum wage earners now need at least 104,400 naira monthly to match the purchasing power that 30,000 naira provided when it was set in April 2019. This means workers require an extra 74,400 naira to maintain their welfare and dignity. Due to inflation, rise in food and fuel prices, and currency depreciation, the current minimum wage has lost its value. To restore the 2019 purchasing power, wages must nearly triple. Research shows that without a nearly 200% pay rise or raise, public and private sector workers will continue to fall below the poverty line. And to talk about this, I'm joined live by a legal practitioner and public affairs analyst, Toho Orevuoja. He joins me now from the United Kingdom. Good afternoon from here. Glad to have you join me.
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you loud and clear. It's good to have you join me. Okay, straight to our conversation. The analysis suggests that 104,400 naira to maintain purchasing power significantly higher than the current minimum wage. Can you delve into the concept of a living wage versus a minimum wage in the Nigerian context? How does this analysis impact, for instance, arguments for a higher minimum wage?
Okay, well, first of all, when we look at the concept of living wage is the high standard, which is the wage that is higher for a, that, why will I put it, let me use the word that is the wage that is equivalent to a level of standard, or is a standard that is required in a society. Then when you talk about the minimum wage, you talk about the minimum wage is what is the least pay to be given to a staff in every given society. So in context of Nigeria, minimum wage, well, it is acceptable for a minimum wage to be implemented. The other thing again is that when you talk about the living wage, it varies from state to state. You cannot compare the standard of living in Kano State, for instance, to the one of Zamfara State, or the standard of living in Port Harcourt to Lagos State. So that is where the living wage comes into play. But minimum wage is something that is generally acceptable, that basically that every areas can adjust to that particular wage for a standard of life, but not at the average that living wage can give in a developed society.
Now, talking about every spectrum, let me bring in another dimension. The story mentions both public and private sector workers. Do we expect the impact of minimum wage inadequacies to be found equally now across both sectors, the private and the public?
Public, that is where the labor, labor is getting it wrong, or their affiliated union are getting it wrong. And if I draw to those listening to us now, if they can recall that at the point that the Petroleum Industrial Act was passed in 2021, majority of us raised concern because of the nature and the economic nature of Nigeria when it comes to the issue of subsidy and when it comes to issue of our exportation of crude oil and importation of petroleum products. You agree with me? You agree with me that whatever the standard of life or whatever the economy of Nigeria will be is determined on how much a liter of petrol is sold. And I'll give you one instance. There is nothing that happens in Nigeria that does not require individual undertaking the transportation of that commodity. That does not require individual providing for the electricity of that commodity to be preserved and every other stuff. But when that was removed and labor did not sit up tight, and the public and private sector did not look into the implication, that is where you now see we are in the current crisis we are in now.
If I may just quickly come in there, just to chip in there, you talked about subsidy and how this has affected our economy as a country. Now, are there
the question? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, just to give more credence.
To lay foundation to the question you asked. Now, when you look into this particular issue now, you will now discover that no matter what labor is demanding, the private sector is there. And the percentage of labor or the percentage of members of the Nigeria Labour Congress and TUC is just about approximately 8% to the labor force in Nigeria. And if we continue to request for this amount of money pushed by labor, and even the one proposed by the federal government, remember, federal government is also proposing, but let's not forget that some states to date are still paying the minimum wage as accrued in 2011. They've not even implemented one of 2019. So if you are bringing this again, it will result to another crisis, economic crisis, inflation, and even loss of jobs in both sectors.
Now, talking about economic crisis, just to build on what you mentioned earlier on, you talked about subsidy and how that has affected our economy as a country. Now, are there other economic policies, for instance, or even social safety nets that could be considered to address the challenges we're facing and also challenges faced by low-wage earners in Nigeria?
Okay, one of the major issue, one of the policy which I believe that would have resolved our problem or this economic crisis now is the fixing of stable electric power supply. I'll tell you, if there is if Nigeria can produce 22 hours electricity, majority of our economic problem will be resolved. Because of one, there will be a boom in the manufacturing sector. Because most of all these manufacturing companies that are closing down is as a result of the high cost of what? Running the power in production. Do you understand? Then two, we'll look at the transport system. Yes, insecurity is one problem because people who are into farming can no longer go to their farm. But those who have the capacity to protect their environment find it difficult to transport their goods. Do you understand? From the point of production to the point of consumption or exportation. And I'll tell you for free, if we can dive into these policies I'm pointing out, just like the issue of power, the issue of transportation, then infrastructure as to road network. Let me give you an example. Do you know how much Africans in the UK spend in terms of, for the purpose of them keeping fit with their African delicacy? But if you find out carefully, my research showed that some of this delicacy are coming from our neighboring country, not even Nigeria. They are coming from our neighboring country. Why the ones coming from Nigeria do not really leave Nigeria border, but they channel them to neighboring country, whereby the exchange rate does not have impact in Nigeria. It has impact from the point of exportation, which is the country that exports them down to the United Kingdom. So these are the policies they need to look at. Yeah, whatever. Let's give it this analysis.
Okay, because of our time, apologies for butting in there because of our time, and I want to get to solutions now. Let's talk solutions now. You had hinted on it earlier on. In 30 seconds, just profile a solution. You talked about power supply, you mentioned transport system, and also insecurity bedeviling Nigeria. Now, in terms of structure, what structural changes might be needed to ensure a stable economic condition for Nigeria as a country?
The stable economic condition, like one of the structure is power. Power can never be power can never be taken away from this particular issue. Then we talk about, we need to revisit the Petroleum Industrial Act again. Because most times people believe that this removal of fuel subsidy is an issue of policy. It's not an issue of policy, it's an issue of law. And so in every country, they subsidize one thing or the other. Till we fix our power sector, issue of subsidy on petroleum product ought to be looked into. That will enable the average Nigerians to access this commodity, because we are like a local government individually. You must power your gen to do whatever you want to do. You must fuel your car, whatever you want to do. And if you look at it carefully, if we can do that, it brings down the current hardship in Nigeria. Then we'll look further to the long term. What are the long term? Is that, okay, well, let's invite the private sector into fixing our refineries. Thank God we have a private refinery now, which the whole of Nigeria, including the federal government, are relying on. While we have 3 domiciled refineries, which we are yet to look.
I'm afraid that's the most we can take on the segment of the news. Thank you so much for your insight on the news.
You're welcome.